Hi, folks. Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. This is CalRecycle's Rdrs, the Recycling and Disposal Reporting System Workshop, Part 2, Southern California edition. So the weather sort of doesn't know how to make up its mind. It was sunny, now it's raining. So it was an interesting day. Anyway, welcome everyone. My name is Steven Sander. You can call me Steve. I'm currently acting supervisor in the Knowledge Integration Section, Policy Development and Analysis Office. And joining me today is the one, the only, the unflappable Eileen Nathaniel, everybody. She's a integrated waste management specialist with the Knowledge Integration System, and she's an expert on all things disposal reporting system related. So we're very lucky to be joined by Eileen, as well as our IT person here, Paul. He's been a great help. So with that being said, let's just jump right in, shall we? But before we do that, just a couple of housekeeping announcements. So please place your cell phones on silent or vibrate mode. Restrooms are located down the hallway across the auditorium entrance. In the event of an emergency, occupants may need to shelter in place or evacuate the building. If an evacuation is called, please exit the building through the exit doors at the back of the auditorium. If a shelter in place is necessary, such as in the event of an earthquake, please drop, cover your head, and hold on to your chair. And we're going to go over just some workshop guidelines, some best practices, and then a little disclaimer. So I'm going to ask you to hold your questions until the Q&A portion. We're going to have some roving mics going around to facilitate that. Please speak loudly and directly into the microphone. I'll interrupt you if I can't hear your question and ask you to project your voice a little bit more. And in the event we cannot immediately answer your question, we'll try and follow up offline. Remember, the conversation is being recorded, so please be on your best behavior at all times. Please remember to listen actively and try to understand where folks are coming from with their line of questioning. Lastly, treat others the way they want to be treated, at least for the duration of these proceedings, since we are all here to learn from one another. So throughout the presentation, you can send your questions and comments to this email address here. It's going to be rdrs@calrecycle, all one word, .ca.gov. And you can also use this email address after the presentation as well if you need to get in touch with program staff. So we just covered that. So in a perfect world, I wouldn't feel obligated to do this, but out of an abundance of caution, I just want to make a few things clear in relation to the contents of this workshop. So this is not legal advice, first of all. I'm not an attorney, and no one on the panel is. Even though we develop the regulations, we're human beings and we're fallible. Well, speaking for myself anyway. I may, over the course of the afternoon, say something that may very well turn out to not correspond exactly with the regulatory requirements, or may not pertain to your specific circumstance for reasons I don't know about. So please, I don't want to say don't take anything I have to say to heart, but at the same time, please understand that, look, mistakes happen. These rules and their specific application tend to get complicated. So please give a little latitude for that and make some allowances, a little room for error. So with that in mind, this workshop should not supplant your own read-through of the regulations. So it's your obligation as a business to follow all applicable regulatory requirements that pertain to you. So I'm asking you to please remain diligent in doing so. If you're the person who inputs data or oversees reporting for your company, take some time to read through the regulations and really understand them, especially if it looks like you're going to be submitting quarterly reports to CalRecycle under Rdrs. So a determination has to be made by April 30th as to whether or not you're a reporting entity in Rdrs and would need to register. Lastly, this training may become obsolete one day if the regulations or data system changes drastically. And if that's the case, we'll make every effort to publish updated training and outreach material that replaces and updates the obsolete sections of the training. So with all that legalese out of the way, here are some learning objectives for today's workshop. By the end of the workshop, you should be able to go back to your company or organization and tell them that you know how to do the following things. Number one, I know if my facility or operation has a reporting obligation, or if not, I know that I need to look it up and where I can go to do that. Number two, I know what type of reporting entity under which I should register my facility or operation. Or if not, I know what I need to do to go research that, and I know what I need to make that happen by April 30th. And number three, I know the basic procedure for how to enter RDRS and input required information. I know what information I need to track down in order to make that happen, again, by April 30th. So without further ado, here's a copy of the agenda. We're about on schedule, so next we'll cover some important background material and then discuss registration requirements for each reporting entity type required to report in RDRS. We'll take about a 10-minute break at approximately 3 and come back, get a little bit more hands-on and possibly interactive. We'll get a little bit more practical anyway, moving away from the theoretical requirements and focusing on the mechanics of getting into the data system and accessing the web's interface, facilitating electronic recycling and disposal reporting. We'll cruise around the site, at least with mock-ups anyway, and discuss various possibilities, form fields and features before bringing things back for a quick Q&A, an opportunity to offer up some final thoughts, some profound epiphanies, if anybody has them. Okay, so let's take a deeper dive into sort of the impetus for why we're here today. But zooming out a bit, we want to talk about statutes versus regulations and the history of how we arrived here today, just to sort of paint a picture for folks who may be less familiar, maybe only now hearing about the requirement to register. So we'll take a dive into the regulations development and discuss what the regulations require in terms of information needing to be provided to CalRecycle. We'll discuss the benefits of the regulations and how we plan on fully implementing the new reporting system, transitioning away from the current disposal reporting system, also known as DRS or EDRS. So real briefly, I just wanted to cover sort of the difference between statute and regulation. So statute is deliberated upon and passed in the State House in Sacramento, signed by the governor in a representative democratic process, whereas regulations interpret statute or make specific statute. So in this case, as you'll see in just a moment, the legislature required the department to adopt regulations. And regulations are adopted through an administrative law process governed by the Office of Administrative Law. So we've just completed that, but we'll talk a little bit more about the sort of specifics of those things and how they interact. But I just wanted to sort of make that as the sort of the baseline for folks' understanding on this. So here's the status quo disposal reporting system, and as you can see, it's quite complicated. Information changing hands several times before being passed along to CalRecycle. So along comes Assembly Bill 901 in 2015 and says we're going to move away from all that to a new system of direct reporting to CalRecycle. AB 1103 further modified Public Resources Code Section 41821.5 to require the department's regulations include food waste self-haulers. So just a bit of background on the enabling statutes here. Taking a look at the bill analyses associated with AB 901, there were three main requirements. One, that required disposal and recycling and composting facilities and operations to report directly to CalRecycle. Two, the bill analysis highlighted that additional enforcement authority was needed due to significant late, inaccurate, and incomplete reporting in DRS, current disposal reporting system. And thirdly, an intent highlighted in the bill analysis was for the department to be provided with similar tools given to the waste tire program to enforce compliance in the submission of these data. So with that in mind, I'd like to, since this is a workshop after all, I want to take a moment for folks to sort of give your feedback or your impressions, if you will. I would like for everyone to please take a moment and read this statute subsection. This is from the Public Resources Code and was enacted with AB 901. So why don't we take about 10, 15 seconds, have everyone read this, maybe reconvene and see if anything sticks out to you. So we'll have the roving mics come along and we'll go to you if you have anything. So let's just take a moment here and read that over. Anybody want to offer any preliminary thoughts? Let's go to this gentlelady over here. Oh, and when you speak, could you state your name and affiliation?
Cynthia Van Tall, my company is Mariposa Eco Consulting. The definition of the disposal facility operator, is there a certain Swiss, and is there a certain, that's where I'm stuck at. Okay.
Well, great question, and I think this serves to sort of illustrate the difference between statute and regulation. So regulations interpret and make specific provisions of statute. So in terms of all of that, they don't necessarily define it as, in the context of that particular article. There probably is a definition of that somewhere in the Public Resources Code. I just don't have it offhand. But what they are referring to basically permitted solid waste facilities. So I believe it would be inclusive of, well, in terms of disposal facility, that's like landfills, transformation, EMSW conversion, that sort of thing. And then when it discusses, I think a little bit later, transfer station operators, and that's probably referring to the transfer processing facilities and operations that have a solid waste facilities permit. But good question.
So they have to have a solid waste facility permit. So we have, in one of my cities, we have the Ralph's, or whatever you call Ralph's, I guess, Food for Less facility, that they're taking all this stuff that's being backhauled, and then there's a lot of residual material that's coming out of the city, but their permit is for, what is it called, renewable. So we had talked about this the last time you were here years ago. Is that included, or what's going to happen with that?
In terms of like the backhaul and whatnot, there's a possibility that may be captured under the food waste self-hauler provision. I don't know, everything about the activities going on there. So I'm thinking we might need to follow up offline about that. But thank you for your question. That does underscore some interesting, things going on with the definitions. Anybody else want to offer feedback? That's okay. I thought the phrase prescribed by the department was kind of stuck out for me. That means we have, a lot of discretion regarding how we want to collect these data. All right. Let's take a moment and read through this portion as well and see if anything sticks out to folks. How we doing here? Anybody want to offer any insights or have any preliminary thoughts? If not, I can just go to the next one here. Oh, so let's go to this gentlelady.
So what does periodic mean?
Yeah, so I think that's another aspect where it's not explicitly defined again, and so that's the purpose of the regulations, is to interpret and make specific that provision. So, skip reading ahead a little bit in terms of the regulations, we decided that periodic would be quarterly.
And then the other question I have is on the types and quantities of materials. Are you saying that you want how much is disposed of, how much is sold, how much is transferred to other recycler and compost facilities? And the reason, my question would be, do we have to name, say who it is sold to? Because that's really problematic. I have compost facilities, and we have people that come in and buy a yard of compost.
Oh,
so am
absolutely.
I supposed to start keeping
Yeah.
track of every name and submit that to you?
Great question. So this is another aspect where the regulations, interpreted and made specific some of these provisions. And so just to be clear, this is the actual law that was passed by the two houses of government in the state and signed by the governor. So we didn't really have we don't have any input in this. We just have to follow what they're telling us. So in terms of your question, as we're getting a little ahead. I'm going to sort of preview this right now. So in terms of compost facilities, you wouldn't be required to identify the every individual end user. We included some provisions that it allowed end user, when material flows to end users, it's going to be aggregated by region. So that would be the county in which you're located, most likely. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, I think, on that, but that's a great question, and we'll discuss that. Any other thoughts on this one? Okay. And this is the subsequent subsection of this statute here. So everything after the first sentence was amended by that AB 1103 that I discussed. All right, so just to provide a little bit of context, this is the law that was passed in 2015 and 2016, and this is how it looks like. This is what it looks like on the books right now. So it was incumbent on the department to adopt regulations that don't exceed the scope of these legislative mandates. So similar to the first subsection, but naming, different entities, so exporters, brokers, self-haulers, transporters of recyclables or compost, they also have reporting obligations that the legislature mandated. So we chose to define self-hauler at the minimum, which was a person that generates and transports using its own employees and equipment more than 1 cubic yard per week of its own food waste to a location or facility not owned or operated by that person. So we are essentially, we had the authority to regulate self-haulers a lot more so than we inevitably, we ended up granting. So, we could have expanded the scope of this statute more than we did. We're currently just retaining the minimum that was prescribed in statute. So I'm going to go to the next slide here, and unless anyone had any thoughts, no. Let's just take a few moments and read the last part of this subsection here. Okay. Oh, and just a heads up, that we're going to try to get the slides available to folks as a PDF in the next couple of days. I know folks have been asking questions about that. We will get these slides to you. Apologies for not having it prior to the meeting. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of hands right now, but essentially this provides some legislative guidance related to items that, may be excluded in terms of what a facility needs to provide to us, as well as our obligations with regard to providing information to jurisdictions needing to be aggregated by company and only upon request. Just 1 second. We'll get the microphone to you.
Sorry, guys, this is like 3 years ago when we had the meetings here originally. So again, I have two things. So this facility, Ralph's, again, because a lot of, Albertsons, are they considered the self-hauler? They're picking it up. Now they're a self-hauler, right? Because they're the self-haul. And they're taking it to an entity that it is permitted as a renewable, but they're still, I don't even care where they're taking it to. They're taking it to be used into something else. Are they responsible to report? That's where I'm stuck at.
So again, I think this is getting a little bit ahead, but
Okay.
I'm going to try to preview it. I think that, so it sounds like several Ralph's grocery stores backhaul to a main distribution center, and then that material is aggregated and sent to maybe compost or other renewable gas
Yes.
production, that kind of thing. Yeah, so at that point, when the truck is leaving the distribution center with laden with food waste, that if the de minimis threshold were exceeded in terms of the cubic
1 cubic
yards per
yard, yeah.
quarter and whatnot, which it sounds like it might be, they wouldn't, and the facility or operation that they're sending it to is not owned or operated by them. It sounds like that there could be a reporting obligation involved there as a food waste self-hauler again. So we'll get to that, I promise, but something to keep in mind. So thank you for the question. Anybody else specifically related to this statutory provision? If not, I'll just advance here. Okay, so I think this C part is pretty important. This essentially is the enabling statute. Well, all of it is in 41821.5, but subsection C specifically requires the department to adopt these regulations. In doing so, they need to be reasonable and necessary, provide a representative accounting of solid waste and recyclable materials handled, processed, or disposed, and that is for, within the state as well as in and out of the state. They must not impose an unreasonable burden on waste and recycling, handling, processing, or disposal operations, otherwise interfere with the safe handling of those materials. Specifically, we needed in the regulations, the legislature told us that the regulations had to do two things specifically. First, that in terms of enforcement and compliance, we needed to provide folks with procedures to ensure opportunity to comply with the regulations, as well as consider factors. There's 7 or 8 factors in terms of determining the penalty amounts and based on sort of whether the action, for instance, was willful or, that sort of thing. So there are a number of considerations that we have to take, and there are steps that we, have to check in order to initiate enforcement action related to this statute. Now that's the point, I want to touch on that a little bit more. That's the point of us having the workshop, is to minimize potential enforcement action. We here at CalRecycle believe in proactive compliance. We really want everyone here, if they have a reporting obligation, to understand their responsibilities and, basically live up to your end of the bargain in terms of following the law as it's laid out here. So we want to, invite you to participate in keep participating in the conversation, so we can all be on the same page with regards to this transition period, because there's going to be a lot more players now and a lot more direct interaction with the department. So we want to make sure everything's on the right foot, if you will, when we set this thing off. So again, thank you all for being here. Okay, so just a little bit more wrapping up. In approving the regulations package, the Office of Administrative Law did conclude that none of the provisions of the regulations ran afoul of any of these statutory provisions. And I just want to emphasize that there are proprietary data protections for information submitted in the recycling and disposal reporting system, and that we made every effort to adopt the least burdensome alternative to facilitate reporting. So again, currently only permitted solid waste facilities and haulers exporting waste report to counties and regional agencies the total tons sent to disposal by jurisdiction of origin, as well as a few other data points. So that's that top portion. AB 901 changes the game in terms of widening the reporting requirements to require reporting on the flow of recyclable and compostable materials by material type, by recyclers and composters, as well as exporters, transporters, brokers, and food waste self-haulers. AB 901 also provides for enforcement by the department, as I stated before, for late reporting and misreporting of data. And expanded reporting requirements will enable the state to perform much more detailed analyses of both waste and recycling flows, and enabling better evidence-based policymaking by the department. This slide provides a visual representation of the rulemaking process. As you can see, it was a very long road, and we'll take a peek at each step in the next few slides. In 2016 and 17, the department conducted informal rulemaking, hosting 9 public workshops, releasing 4 drafts of regulatory text, and engaging with stakeholders extensively throughout. In 2018, the formal process was conducted wherein there was a formal 45-day comment period, a public hearing, 3 15-day comment periods, and altogether over 1,000 distinct comments and questions were submitted. When staff determined no further changes were needed, the department formally approved the regulations package in late December of last year and sent it to the Office of Administrative Law for their review and ultimately publication in the California Code of Regulations. They entered into immediate effect on March 5th and can be found on Westlaw's online California Code of Regulations under Title 14, Sections 18815.1 to 18815.13. So just to recap, circling back, here's the old disposal reporting system and the new system, which facilitates direct reporting. We will be receiving reports directly from the following reporting entities under the proposed regulations. Haulers, if hauling material out of state or to direct land application. Transfer processing facilities and operations. Disposal facilities. Recycling and composting facilities and operations. And brokers and transporters who determine the destination of material they handle. AB 901 reporting expands the scope to include facilities that have traditionally not reported to the department, such as recycling and composting facilities, in-vessel digestion facilities and operations, wastewater treatment plants, and brokers and transporters. All the labeled entities in the diagram shown here will report directly to CalRecycle should they have a reporting obligation. All these entities are going to directly report to the department. They'll still talk to one another, and in many cases, for instance, haulers will have to provide information to transfer processors. Transfer processors are still going to have to provide certain information to disposal facilities and so on. So in reality, it's a little bit more complicated than this. There's still interaction between these different nodes here. That's not going to go away. So to summarize, in EDRS, entities report via counties or regional agencies, and the information changes hands several times, getting aggregated before being passed along to CalRecycle. And it covers disposal and disposal-related activities only, such as alternative daily cover, alternative intermediate cover, and other beneficial reuse. However, in Rdrs, entities will report directly to CalRecycle. It includes disposal-related and disposal-related activities, yes, just like DRS, but also adds recycling and composting activities. And one thing I'll highlight, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but it isn't up on the slide, but the introduction of source sector on the solid waste side is new with RDRS. Entities will need to begin keeping track of the source sectors from which they receive the waste in terms of percent residential, commercial, and self-haul. It also provides additional granularity in terms of defining certain streams of material and how each of those need to be reported. The department firmly believes that the new reporting system will be a vast improvement over the current system. Direct reporting to the department, as stated earlier, will streamline the reporting process. This will allow for data to be made available to jurisdictions and the public much more quickly. Reporting entities and jurisdictions will be able to access a revamped suite of reports that provide pertinent and timely information about types and quantities of material handled from quarter to quarter and from year to year. A unified data system architecture will allow, for instance, disposal facilities to view what transfer processors reported sending them, and they can accept or modify the incoming tonnages. This will lead to, as I said, better and more granular reporting about the origins of waste, even when the waste flows through multiple facilities prior to being disposed. Moreover, with the department serving as the central repository of data, this will facilitate better information collection and processing. More detailed information will aid jurisdictions, for instance, so they can correct or follow up on any potential issues soon after they arise. New reports for reporting entities will also be available about the types and quantities of material handled, as I said, from quarter to quarter or from year to year, so they can verify their data, number one, and number two, gain insight about where their material is going and how it's being reported in the system. So I just want to preview this for now, but for RDRS registration purposes, here's sort of our architecture. At the top, we have the organization or the physical site, which is the place where the business is located. All right, so reporting entities occupy space within sites. Reporting entity is like your landfill or your transfer station, so there can be multiple reporting entities on a single site. Add one more sort of stitch in there. There's also the reporting entity sub-activity or dependent activity. There's always it's always a recycling or composting facility or operation. It can't be any other reporting type, this sub-activity. It can report as a dependent of a reporting activity within the site, or it could be its own reporting entity. We'll talk about all of this and clear it up later. But my point here was basically, we wanted to be flexible to ease reporting burden while still allowing the department to collect required information. So just kind of a preview of that. Here we have an example site, John's Resource Recovery Complex. It's a complex site with two reporting entities, a landfill and a transfer processing facility, John's MRF transfer station. And as you can see, John's MRF transfer station is a permitted transfer processor. It's taken the lead reporting for a dependent sub-activity called John's Recycling, which has to register but has chosen to report as part of a transfer processor. It could report as a dependent of the landfill if management so desired, in which case that box would just be on the left-hand side. So we'll talk about all of these ways in which you can register your facility or operation in a little bit later after the break. I've alluded to this several times, but one of the most important dates is coming right up, which is the registration period, April 1st to 30th, 2019. So that's part of why we're all here today, to gain knowledge about how to do that. And so we'll try to make that happen for you. July 1 is when entities with reporting obligations need to start recording required information to be submitted to CalRecycle as part of their quarterly reports. Rdrs opens for haulers on October 1st, 2019, and is due for haulers October 31st. For transfer processors, recyclers, composters, and broker transporters, the system will open November 1st and be due November 30th. Now, as you probably are able to guess, for disposal facilities, the reporting will open December 1st and be due December 31st. And so the staggered reporting dates are so that each entity type can finish their reporting, so the next entity type can have that information available in the system already. For instance, when a disposal facility logs on December 1st, all the transfer processing reporting will have already concluded, meaning that they have data that is ready to be brought in that was that where the transfer processors said they sent waste to the disposal facility. All of that information, along with the jurisdiction of origin as well as the source sector, can be then brought into the disposal facility when it comes time for that entity to do its reporting. I just wanted to flag October 15th, 2019 as the due date for the last due date for the current disposal reporting system. So that will be for quarter 2, 2019. It will be due on October 15th. And then after which DRS will pretty much sunset entirely and we'll have fully transitioned to Rdrs, which may be a welcome thing for some folks out there anyway. So here's some key takeaways. If you only keep 3 things in mind, it should be this. DRS, as I mentioned, going away as of October 15th of this year. We're going to be transitioning to RDRS, which will be an improvement over the current DRS. And registration opens very soon. We'll get to the bottom line on that as far as how to determine whether your facility has a reporting obligation and what y'all will need to do in terms of getting into the system to make your profile and register. Okay, so let's see how we're doing on time. We're still doing pretty well. Let's take a few questions. Anybody have some? No questions. Okay. Very good, ma'am. We'll come right over to you with the mic. Just 1 second, please. Sure. Do you mean the agenda? Oh, this one. Yeah. We'll leave that up. I saw a few people staring at that. Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Actually, you know what? I'll wait because you might be covering it in a minute
Oh, okay.
after the break.
Sure. Fair enough. I don't see any questions from the online, so if everyone's okay, I'll just sort of skip ahead a little bit to the next section, which I think is probably one of the most important and probably generate a lot of questions, so we'll have some extra time to take those. All right, so this is the part 3 of 6. Do I need to register? So this is an effort to help folks understand, determine, first of all, what reporting entity type you might be, and secondly, whether or not you have an obligation to register and report. So we'll talk about haulers, transfer processors, disposal facilities, recyclers, composters, brokers, transporters. Those are generally the reporting entity categories that we use in RDRS. So I know there might be a little bit of confusion. Maybe you think I might be this or that. Well, we'll clear it up in this section for you. Okay, so do I need to register? This is basically some questions you would be asking yourself to determine whether or not your facility or operation or business, if this is something that's even within your wheelhouse, or if this is something you even need to concern yourself with. So in terms of asking questions to yourself, you'll want to ask yourself, do I handle these reportable materials? The reportable materials, what's considered a reportable material in the regulations are the following material types: solid waste, carpet, CDI, which is construction, demolition, and inert debris, furniture, glass, metal, organics, paper, plastic, textiles, white and brown goods. So if those are material types that you handle commonly, that's a clue that you may have an obligation to register and report in the system. Second question you need to ask yourself, do I handle more than the de minimis amount in any 3-month period? So we just talked a little bit about this earlier with the gentlelady's question, but that de minimis threshold can be anywhere from 6,500 pounds to 2,500 tons per quarter, and that depends on the type of material that you handle or what type of reporting entity you might be. So we'll talk about those thresholds in just a second, because that sort of may determine whether that may, be sort of the make or break point as to whether or not you should register your facility. If you never exceed the tonnage threshold, there's probably not an obligation to register. So do I create intermediate products? What do I mean by intermediate products? I mean, recyclable materials such as plastic flake or pellets, that kind of thing. Products, that are used to then be turned into new products. For instance, your recycled plastic flake is put into an extruder and turned into a new product. So the plastic flake would be the intermediate product in terms of closing the loop. So you can refer to the regulations for in terms of what we think are intermediate products. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in subsequent slides. Okay, do I send intermediate products to end users or other reporting entities? Another example of an intermediate product, the gentlelady mentioned compost. We would consider compost intermediate product. So if you're sending large quantities of that to end users or to other reporting entities, you probably have an obligation to register and report in Rdrs. Do I haul a significant amount of material out of state or to land application? Well, if you do that, especially on the solid waste side, but applying to any commodity here or material type, that would trigger a reporting obligation in some instances if you're a contract hauler. Any reporting entity, would be subject to that. Anyway, just something to ask yourself. That's a clue, anyway, that you might have an obligation. Am I a wastewater treatment plant, aka POTW, or publicly owned treatment works? Generally speaking, if you are a wastewater treatment plant and you send intermediate products off-site, chances are good that you would need to register and report as a recycling and composting facility or operation. So we'll talk about that again in a little bit more detail. And then we'll talk about what exclusions and exemptions may apply to me. Now, it gets a little tricky. There are a lot of caveats and sort of technicalities, if you will, with regards to who's in and who's out of the regulations. There's been significant back and forth in terms of the regulatory development process, speaking to this point specifically. But before we sort of get into that, just want to emphasize, the sort of why aspect about this. Everybody who reports has to register first. You have to basically create a profile, so we know who you are in order to then submit your quarterly reports. So it's basically like, any application, you need to, make an account. Just like, your Uber or your Lyft, you got to make an account first before you can use the features. Additionally, it's in the regulations. Enforcement action will be taken for non-compliance. I'm just going to leave that there. To assist CalRecycle in managing waste and recycling. Look, ultimately, as Lord Kelvin says, you can't manage what you can't measure. So we need to have a sense of the players in the game, and if we're to adequately, manage material and help improve recycling and commodity markets. So this is basically the nexus point to us being able to make, good evidence-based policy that can correct some of these, little bit more negative things we're hearing these days about recycling. So this is, I would see this as crucial to managing the future of recycling statewide. It's not just a pointless exercise. But I just want to emphasize that for folks. When you report in this system, you are contributing to, improving data gathering and analysis, and therefore, better evidence-based policy development. I'm a firm believer in that we have to be empowered with the tools, the tons of materials going where and what kind it is, so we can pass some better laws and, focus our policy tools on exactly, where it's needed in order to, improve the system. Ultimately, we have a policy goal in place to improve our recycling rate. So we really want to get there with your help. Okay. So further on this, so stakeholders had expressed an interest in the list of entities expected to report during the rulemaking process. The regulations were amended subsequent to the 45-day comment period to accommodate this request. A list of entities expected to report can be found in section 18815.3B of the regulations. A list of entities we think would be out would be in the subsequent subsection C. So this one's pretty important. The slide here provides a rundown of the de minimis tonnages under which reporting is not required and above which reporting is required. The general case applies to all materials with a few notable exceptions, which we'll talk about in a second. It's 100 tons per quarter of reportable materials. If you never go over 100 tons per quarter, chances are you may not have to register depending on what you handle. But that's the general case. If you think you may go over 100 tons, it would still be a good idea to register in the event that, when you do, you already have the profile. In the event you don't go over 100 tons and you had created a profile, you'll simply indicate that the facility or operation has no reportable activities for the quarter, hit submit, and you're done. So disposal facilities report at any tonnage and are not subject to this 100-ton rule. Organics has a special caveat as well. If you're a contract hauler and you deliver more than 50 tons of organics per quarter to direct land application, you must report on this material transfer. So this is an instance where it's lower than the 100-ton threshold, general case. Additionally, CDI has a much higher threshold. CDI, of course, construction, demolition, and inert debris. It has a much higher threshold, but in order to qualify for that higher threshold, you have to exclusively handle CDI and not solid waste or any other material type. So lastly, I think we sort of previewed this, food waste self-haulers, the de minimis 13 cubic yards per quarter of their own food waste, which translates into 6,500 pounds or more per quarter, above which food waste self-haulers would need to register and report pursuant to the regulations. Okay, now in terms of who's in, this is again the general case, and you can look to section 18815.3B of the regulations for more detail on this specifically. Haulers are persons who take material from a generator and deliver it to a reporting entity, end user, or out of state. Contract haulers only report to CalRecycle when they haul 100 tons or more out of state per quarter, or when they haul 50 tons or more to direct land application per quarter, as was mentioned in the prior slide. Food waste self-haulers, same tonnage threshold from the previous slide. You're in if you meet or exceed the tonnage thresholds for food waste. Transfer processing facilities and recycler composters will adhere to either the 100 or 2,500 ton thresholds, depending on what they handle. Of course, is it exclusive CDI, or are there other materials in there as well? Brokers and transporters generally follow the 100-ton rule. I can't really think of any other instance where it would be a different threshold. So very important here, generators are out. Generators are folks whose activities involve the initial creation of material. That's the definition in the regulations. You can also think about it as those who initially generate reportable materials, including solid waste. So you can be a generator and something else. So it wouldn't be the case where you could just say, look, hey, I littered this piece of paper on the ground. That makes me a generator of waste. Therefore, I'm out for everything I do. No, you're only out as a generator if that's all you do. If you have other reportable activities, you would need to register and report as appropriate to those activities. Same thing for end user. There's a tendency out there for folks to think of themselves as end users when they may in fact do something else. But if all you do is make use intermediate products, to make things, for instance, blow molding a plastic bottle, then if all you do is make intermediate products, then you're probably out. But if you're doing something like crushing rock and selling it in addition to applying it yourself, you may be in for that activity of the sale. So there's 6 different end user categories. I don't really want to get into each one here, but if you think you might be, that's the regulatory section where you would look it up. There's some definitions associated with that. This is in the definitions section of the regulation. So if you think those might apply to your facility or operation more so than on the recycling side, i.e. you're more of a manufacturer or user than you are a recycler, it might behoove you to kind of look at this and ascertain, am I a recycler, or in fact, am I just using recycled materials, in which case you'd be out. Okay, also out are those who exclusively handle excluded materials. So here's a list of materials that are excluded from being reported on. You would never indicate that you sold, transferred, or disposed any of these in Rdrs. There are other, of course, you may be required to report on the sale or transfer of these materials in some other system, but not ours. So household hazardous waste, that may already be covered by the Form 303 reporting, so we didn't want folks to tell us about the household hazardous waste flows. Same thing for hazardous waste, universal waste, electronic waste, medication and sharps, used oil, paint, mattresses, business-to-business post-industrial materials, which there's a definition in the regulations if you're interested in knowing about what that might be. Non-hazardous secondary materials excluded from solid waste. There's an associated Code of Federal Regulations definition associated with that. I think that has to do with creosote-treated railroad ties. So very specific out there. Materials that are defined as reused. So if all you do is one or more of the following activities, for instance, you run a household waste operation, that would not need to be registered or reported upon. Similarly, for instance, if you ran a mattress collection operation, since that's an excluded material, you wouldn't be obligated to register or report for that flow. Now, if you did other stuff in addition to that, that's a different story, as we discussed with the example of me littering the piece of paper. Okay, so by show of hands, just curious here, who in the room thinks they might be a hauler who needs to register and report in Rdrs? Okay, I see a few hands here, so that's good. So this section probably pertains to you. Well, we'll see anyway. Yeah, as I mentioned before, the contract hauler has these 2 tonnage thresholds that are most important, the 100-ton threshold for sending reportable materials out of state. So if you meet or exceed that tonnage threshold, you would be required to register and report for those flows. You wouldn't be required to then report your in-state flows. It was just be for the out-of-state. Contract haulers who haul 50 tons or more of reportable materials to direct land application, which is an end user category. That would trigger reporting. And in addition, food waste self-haulers who haul 13 cubic yards or more of their own food waste to a facility or operation not owned by them, that would put you squarely in the regulations. Who's out, an entity that doesn't do any of the activities in the last slide and exclusively does one or more of these activities. So, number one, you take material from a generator and you haul it directly to an end user. That flow would be out. So there are some examples, except land application. So that's an example of when it would be in. But otherwise, if you take material directly from a generator, haul it to an end user, you don't have to report on that. Secondly, a contract hauler who takes material from a generator, hauls it to an in-state reporting entity like a transfer station, MRF, or a landfill in California, no need to report that information in Rdrs. So that, I think, covers 99% of contract haulers' flows. They just deliver material to an in-state reporting entity like their own transfer station, their own MRF. We're not interested in collecting those data from the hauler because that information will already be reported to the receiving facility who would be a reporting entity in Rdrs. So for those reasons, we decided it didn't make logical sense really for in-state contract haulers to be reporting that to us. Now, they'll still have to follow the rules of, providing jurisdiction of origin information to the receiving facility, as well as potentially information about the source sector. But there are different methods that you can use to ascertain that or get that information from the haulers, or have the haulers provide that information to the receiving transfer processor or other facility, direct haul to landfill. There's still a reporting, you still got to tell the landfill, information related to jurisdiction of origin and so on. So it doesn't take away any of those existing responsibilities. It's just, I want to be very clear about this. There isn't a reporting obligation to the state for that specific waste or recycling flow. Does that make sense? Okay. Sure. Give us just a second to get the microphone around.
So I'm a little bit confused as to why you singled out self-haulers of food waste. And as an example, we get food waste in from different entities that are collecting food waste. And we also get in food waste that, say, restaurants self-haul to us. It's all being collected and that information's being collected for us. So why are you distinguishing between the self-haul and the contract haul in that case?
Great question, ma'am. And my answer is to sort of punt that in the sense that it wasn't us who made that be the case. It was the legislature passing AB 1103 that required us to collect these data from the food waste self-haulers. And that was the part of the exercise in 41821.5B, that when we had y'all look at that up on the board, it did say, the department shall define food waste self-hauler in this sort of way, and that basically roped in self-haulers, obligating them to report to us. So we don't really have a choice about it. It was the legislature who imposed that information collection as a necessity. Does that help?
No.
Okay. Well, we can follow
I just
up,
don't
but
see how. I just don't see how you would reach those people to inform of this.
Right.
If a restaurant is self-hauling their own material, how would you reach a restaurant and tell them that they have to register with you in order to self-haul?
Well, on that specific point, we'd be happy to work with you to sort of help disseminate and make that happen. In terms of the regulations development process, we tried to notice some of those trade organizations that represent whose constituents were, for instance, restaurants, large generators of food waste, grocery manufacturers association, and that sort of thing. So, we did try to make them aware of the regulation. Again, just to reiterate, and I don't want to get too hung up on this, but this is something that the legislature required us to do, define food waste self-haulers in this fashion and make them report to us. That's all I can really say about that. Thank you for your question. Next, we'll talk about the requirements for transfer processor. So let's do this again. Show of hands, who thinks they might be a transfer processor? All right, it's about the same number of hands. That's interesting. Yeah, so this will probably be of interest to you all. Transfer processors, and I think I alluded to this in the previous slides, but here are some clues that will sort of influence whether your decision-making in terms of whether or not you need to register and report. So looking at the regulations, what do the regulations require? Well, the regulations say that folks who are transfer processing facilities and operations, including those with a notification, registration, standardized, or full solid waste facilities permit is considered, and either transfers or processes 100 tons or the 2,500 tons of exclusive CDI. If you have both of those things in combination, you are pretty much considered a transfer processor for Rdrs purposes and would need to register and report as one. So that's essentially, it covers the permit status and the threshold above which reporting is required. So that's, it's pretty straightforward as far as transfer processors because it's more so related to permit status and whether or not you have a solid waste facilities permit for those operations. So we included in the regulations a list of permit statuses and permit types that we think would be in as transfer processor. So let's just take a moment. I'm not going to read all of them, but you can see there's quite a few permit statuses and tiers that we think would be in as transfer processor. So, of particular import, small volume, medium and large volume transfer processing facilities and operations. Those entities already typically file quarterly reports with the CalRecycle Form 870 quarterly station notification reporting. And we'll be asking similar information from those facilities and operations that are submitting those reports currently. Here's some more facilities and operations that we think would be in as transfer processors. So looking at mixed waste processing and material recovery facilities that have a solid waste facility permit, that's who we're trying to target as far as you're in as transfer processor. And you can look at the subsection B3 of the regulatory text for an exhaustive list of all the facilities. Now, in terms of who's out, you may be exempted based on again, if you're in, some facilities are in based on permit status, some facilities are out based on permit status. So you can read about that in the appropriate regulatory code section. For instance, maintenance district yard, you can look to the point 2A36 for the full definition of maintenance district yard. It's essentially an operation where, there's street sweepers sweeping public thoroughfares. They'll bring it back to a central facility, and it's, put into like a skip or a dumpster, or like a roll-off container, and then it's sent basically to municipal processing, like transfer processor. We view those maintenance district yards more so as generators than transfer, because they're still using the municipal infrastructure to handle the waste that they're collecting. So for those reasons, we have placed them out of the regulations. They do not have to file a quarterly report or register in the system. So if you think that might pertain to you, please read the definition for that. Emergency transfer processing operations not required to report, as well as emergency CDI processing operations do not need to be registered or reported. Okay, so show of hands, who thinks they might be a disposal facility? All right, about 4 or 5 people. So disposal facility, and I previewed this in a few slides ago, but basically any tonnage you dispose or beneficially reuse, and you have a solid waste facility permit for solid waste landfill or these other permit types. So solid waste landfill, engineered municipal solid waste conversion facility, transformation, inert debris type A, type B disposal facility, industrial waste co-disposal facilities, and waste tire disposal facilities. Those are all instances of entities we think would be in as disposal facility for Rdrs reporting. And you can look at subsection B1 of the regulatory text. But basically this restates it in its entirety. Who's out? EMSW conversion facilities that exclusively convert, source separated tires and biomass prior to receipt by the facility. So we have a specific out on that, as well as inert debris engineered fill operations, or IDEFO. We see that as more so an end user. So there is an end user category associated with inert debris fill that you would use to indicate that flow. And lastly, biomass conversion facility is considered out as far as being regulated as a disposal facility in Rdrs. I don't want to get into it too much because it's not particularly relevant, but biomass conversion has its own reporting system and scheme that's already statutorily mandated. So to do this in Rdrs would probably be duplicative. Okay, recycling and composting facilities and operations. I know this gentlelady would probably be one. And who else might be? Oh, quite a few folks. Okay, great. So this is a little bit more complicated, I'm afraid, than the other ones that are more so based on your permit status. This you kind of have to ask yourself, probe a little bit more deeply, because y'all have not traditionally been in the regulatory scheme in terms of reporting or on CalRecycle's radar screen. We don't really have permit statuses or anything like that to base the determination of whether you need to register or report. So for this exercise, we're more so looking at the types of materials that you send out of your facility, generally speaking. So with regards to recycling and composting facilities, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but because this covers more so the reporting aspect as opposed to registration. But recycling composting facilities are never obligated to tell the department what they take in. They're only you only tell us what leaves your facility, bales of this or that, or flake, pellets, compost, that sort of thing. Let's just dive on in. I think it'll make some more sense. Recycling facility, any facility or operation that recycles material. Well, that's not very helpful, but because what does recycling mean? Well, pursuant to the regulations, recycling has the same meaning as Section 40180 of the Public Resources Code, so in case you're interested, you can look that up. But for our purposes, really, we're going to be focusing on a person. A person is a recycler if they engage in the activities described in the definition associated with a recycler. So here's some clues about, if you do the following activities, you may be in as a recycler. Sorting, cleaning, baling, shredding, pulping, cullet making, flaking, pelletizing, and so on. If you do any of that, that's it might be, again, a clue that you would be in as a recycler composter. So just something to keep in mind. Some other questions to help you determine if you're a recycler composter. Yeah, did you do any of those, things in the previous slide? Do you create intermediate products? So again, pellets, flake, pulp, bales of metal, glass cullet, things that replace fuel, wood chips, compost, homogeneous mixture for direct land application like aggregates, road base, biosolids. If you send off, large quantities of these types of materials, it's possible that you would be in as recycler composter if you met or exceeded the de minimis tonnage threshold indicated on that slide, the 100 and 2,500 tons, if it's 2,500 if it's exclusive CDI. So to make it a little bit easier for folks, we also did the same sort of exercise within the regulations. We went ahead and listed some types, sample facilities and operations that we think would be in as recycler composter, as opposed to other reporting entity types. So material recovery facilities that do not require a solid waste facilities permit, also known as a recycling center or clean MRF, would be expected to report in Rdrs, again, if you met or exceeded the tonnage threshold. Wastewater treatment plant, again, folks who send off large quantities of biosolids to end use or to to recycling, that's a reportable material handling activity. So if wastewater treatment plant would do that, that's reportable. If another facility or operation did that, it's reportable. It's not so that we're picking on wastewater treatment plants. It's that they're doing reportable material handling activities that need to be reported on just like anyone else. Paper pulpers, textile fiber reclaimers, plastic reclaimers, shredders, grinders, flakers, pelletizers, metal shredders, sorters, and processors, glass cullet manufacturers and beneficiators, beverage container recycling program recyclers or processors. So this would probably only apply to, large operations, that met or exceeded that 100-ton threshold for the bottles and cans, if it were that last example. Again, so here's some more sample facilities that we think would be in as recycler, composter, carpet collectors and recyclers, C&D, CDI, inert debris recyclers, chipping and grinding facilities and operations, wood debris, and C&D chipping and grinding, automobile shredders, and then this kind of blurs the line of recycler and composter. It's not really relevant, whether you think you're a recycler versus composter. The two report in the same fashion. So compostable material handling facilities and operations, composting research operations, in-vessel digestion facilities and operations, wastewater treatment plants. Again, straddling the line sort of between recycler and composter, but the two report in exactly the same way, so the distinction is not entirely relevant for reporting purposes. Who's out? So composting facilities and operations and in-vessel digestion facilities and operations that are already excluded by those respective regulations. So in other words, if your compost facility or operation is outside the scope of the current composting regs or the current in-vessel digestion regs, you would not need to report in this system either. So it's like if you're out for that, you're out for this too. If you're in for that, you're probably in for this too if you do any significant tonnage throughput. Recycler who only recycles what material they have generated. A recycler who exclusively uses material for their own end use and does not sell or transfer reportable material. So if you, for instance, took in glass cullet and then in-house you remanufactured your own bottle and put, that you would be out from that, reporting that you basically sent material to yourself. In that instance, so it would not be reportable. But we can talk through some of the specifics on that. Wastewater treatment plant that either only sends material to other wastewater treatment plants or does not sell or transfer any organic feedstock or intermediate products off-site. So those are some of the exclusions that we have built into the regulations. Okay, if you are primarily engaged in resale for reuse, such as thrift stores, automobile dismantlers, building supply reclaimers, or reusers, there are two ways you might be excluded based on your revenue or based on the tonnage. So if the revenues for resale for reuse exceed the revenues for recycling, you would be out under that clause. If the tonnages of resale for reuse exceeded the tonnages for recycling, you would also be out in the resale for reuse clause. And then, lastly, I think, a person who exclusively recycles non-reportable materials such as HHW, that may seem pretty straightforward, but I want to emphasize that that's not a reportable activity for these RDRS registration or reporting purposes. Can I get to you in just a second? I'm almost through with my spiel. Just want to cover brokers and transporters. Lastly, brokers and transporters, and it's a little bit easy to get tripped up between the difference between a broker transporter and a hauler. A broker transporter takes material from a reporting entity and moves it to either another reporting entity or to an end user. whereas haulers take material from generators, and generators aren't reporting entities. So that's the distinction. Brokers and transporters would be in as a reporting entity, meaning they need to register and report if they sell or transfer 100 tons of material for which they controlled and determined the destination. So if all you do is move material, if someone told you, where to go and just to move the material, you would not have a reporting obligation. It's only if you're the one who determines the destination of that material that's, put on your truck or however the case may be with that. If you're out, like I said, if you don't determine the destination of the material, you're out. So best practices, when in doubt, please register. You can always delete your registration before reporting opens, so without any penalties. So if there's any, if it turns out, I meant to do this, register in a slightly different manner, that's fine. I think the point is just to get as many folks as possible into the system and up to speed. And so I would suggest, if you're on the fence about whether your facility or operation needs to register and report, just go ahead and do so, and then email the Rdrs at calrecycle.ca.gov, sort of your rationale, what you're thinking, why you think you might be in or out, and we can help and sort of lay out, as much as you can your situation. We'll try to help you, understand what your reporting obligations might be if you in fact have one. We'll be discussing, sort of best practices with regards to actually how to register in the subsequent agenda section. But yeah, now I would like to also, one more thing. Coming April 1st, there's going to be a new tool that we're going to release on our CalRecycle's website on the RDRS reporting. It's basically, do I need to register tool. It will walk you through many of the questions that I posed, to the audience today, like what kind of materials do you handle and in what quantities, what kind of permit do you hold, if any, how you regulate it, where you send material, and based on your answers to those, it will output a determination. We think you're a transfer processor and a landfill, for instance. So it'll take the responses and give a preliminary non-binding determination just to help folks out, with understanding what all they need to do. So you can follow the link that's in that slide, and it will be going live April 1st alongside the RDRS registration page. So I just want to be clear, the RDRS registration page is not going to open until April 1st. To correspond with the opening of registration. All right, let's go ahead and take this gentleman's question right there. Yes, sir.
Hi, Nick Morrell with the LA County Sanitation Districts, and I think we're a regulated entity in multiple categories, but my question here is regarding a sub-activity, the specifics being a recycle center at a MRF. So the same site, perhaps below the threshold of 100 tons at the RC, obviously over at the transfer processing facility. That material gets measured. I mean, we keep receipts and logs at the RC, but it's baled along with the aluminum or plastic, the cullet. It's all handled in the same manner after it goes through the RC. So is that sub-activity required to report only if it exceeds 100 tons?
Great question, and I think there's a couple different working pieces, parts to your question, but I would say that it never needs to report. It would always be it could be a sub-activity of the transfer processor. So I think I think we might need to follow up offline just because it's kind of a specific question.
And the reason I'm asking is so that as a regulated entity, it sounds like we'll have to get this web pass, and it's getting into the second stage of what you're going to talk about. But if it does exceed 100 tons. At the recycle center, it sounds like it would be required to, and therefore have reporting and a form, which we haven't seen, to understand how that form would be filled out for either the RC or for the transfer station. So I was hoping that CalRecycle would provide a template of the future form, which I haven't seen yet. But the point I'm making is I don't believe that it would fall into that threshold. I'd love to have that many customers, but given the restrictions on our customers, it would be a high threshold for us. For glass, perhaps, it might push us over depending on the activity. But my point being, if we have to be a regulated entity with a sub-activity being the RC, we would then have to register for that if we pass that threshold. So I would like a definitive answer about how that actually would occur.
Yeah, and so in terms of your first point about demonstrating the system, we're going to be doing that in the next exercise, so you can look forward to that. With regards to your question about the threshold for registration, if you never go over 100 tons as a sub-activity, you wouldn't be required to register or report as a separate sub-activity. But again, I think it would be best to sort of follow up one-on-one, just because it's kind of specific to your circumstance. But hopefully, we can resolve these considerations, and I think the subsequent exercise may be illuminating for you. So I would just ask you to maybe hang on a bit until we get there for that.
Just to follow up, though, but what we're talking about, I think, today is just the registration process. I guess I'm getting to the level of where we actually have to report our data and how that system will work when you interact with it. Are you going beyond just how we get a entity, in the reporting system, or are you going to talk about how you actually interact with the system?
So we're going to talk about how to interact with the system with regards to registration.
Only.
In today's presentation only. That's correct, yes. So, I think to talk about the actual reporting aspects, that's not within the scope of this exercise, unfortunately.
Hi, Rory. Good afternoon. Nick Bubalo with SLSN Incorporated. We're a engineered fill debris operation, which is one of the entities that aren't required to register a report. My question is that we also do recycling of Class 2 base at our facility. So would we also, even though we don't have to register as an entity for our IDEFO, would we have to register for the recycling of the Class 2 base that we do?
That then goes into the IDEFO?
No, that would be sold to end users.
Oh, I see.
Primarily.
Yeah. So if you're doing an off-site sale of that material, and it met or exceeded the threshold for CDI, it's possible that activity may qualify as a reporting entity.
And if it did fall into that category, how would it be reported? By what left the facility?
Yeah, it would be the tons of material, of CDI material that was sold or transferred to end users by county.
Okay, yeah, by county. Would it be by tons, by jurisdiction, by?
It would be tons by material type and region that the end user exists in. So for instance, if you sold it to small individual end users in LA County, you would report the total amount of CDI that you sold to end users in LA County and for Kern County and Mendocino County and so on.
Right. So our engineered fill operation would not be a registered entity, but the recycling operation at the same location there would probably be.
It sounds like it based on what I'm hearing right now.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, thank you. Anybody else? Let's take this gentleman here in the middle. Oh, and I just want to follow up about the with the gentleman from LA Sanitation. So my boss is listening. He wanted me to chime in with basically, a lot of this depends on how the activity and the sub-activity are registered. The threshold is for the entire site when it comes to outflows, and you can report the flows with the transfer processing facility or operation. So maybe that gets into a little bit of what you're talking about. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to follow up offline with that. Go ahead with your question, sir.
Yes, are organic tonnage measured in dry tons, the dry equivalent, or actual tons?
Good question. It's however much it weighed at the moment it departed your site. So whether it was wet at the time or dry at the time, it's that weight. Okay, let's see. Any other questions for now? Oh, let's see. Great. This gentleman over here.
My name is Craig Dorr. I'm with American Reclamation South Coast Fibers. We're a trash removal and a recycling company, and also C&D processing. But we also do a lot of work within cities with reports to City of El Monte, Montebello, Pasadena, you name it, Glendale, and they're popping up more and more all the time simply because of what CalRecycles was requesting the cities to do. Is that going to temper down a little bit? Are we going to be duplicating our reports to the cities and you with the same information? Or by going directly to CalRecycles, are we going to be able to eliminate those reports that we were giving to the cities to give to you?
So great question. I'm not familiar with, the extent of the reporting that's required to cities. And I totally believe you when you say that it's quite a bit. I'm hopeful that the same data points that you're providing to the city can also, you can also turn around and provide that in the same format to the CalRecycle. I get that there's a number of things out there that are instructing people to report to so-and-so, and we can only basically control what we're given in terms of our mandate. So we want to be sensitive for folks who have other reporting obligations, but and in some cases, it may even be the case that you're having to report the same information to different people. I think that kind of underscores or speaks to the fact that, interagency communication can always stand to be improved, especially at all levels of government. I want to hear about your specific instance. I want to know more about it. So we can, take some appropriate action to help you all out with seeing what we can do to ease, reporting and with this or that type of thing. So, please follow up with me on that because we do want to be sensitive to that. Great question.
Hi, this is Jorge Montezuma with LA County Sanitation Districts. In regards to composting, we have a composting facility, but maybe this question expands to other composting facilities as well. It seems like the material going in won't be reported, only the material going out. And in our case, we have wood that's coming in from one specific vendor, and they have different sources of that wood. Some of that is maybe coming from places with chip and grind permits. Some of the other ones may just be coming from farms. And I don't know if, what kind of permits they may have, or the crusher that comes in may have to be able to grind that material. How can I follow up with whoever's providing me wood to make sure that they are following, any new permits that they need to get, or maybe not permits, but maybe do they need to register or not, or they need to register their sources of wood as well? I don't think the farmers are going to be, having to register through this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think any action is necessarily specifically required on your part, but if you wanted to, help us out and get the message out to folks, you could simply ask them, if they are permitted, what their permit status is, and if it, falls within some of those that I mentioned in either transfer processor or recycler composter, you could potentially try and inform them, of their reporting obligations if they're not, sort of up to speed on it. I have a feeling that, as you said, farmers and individual generators of wood debris aren't going to be permitted. So again, they wouldn't, unless they sent, a huge volume, and even then, they wouldn't be required to register, so, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a requirement, but it would be sort of helpful for you to check in. Also, I just want to be clear that in terms of recycling and composting facilities, it's not necessary or required to collect, jurisdiction of origin information, for example. So, it's not the case where you would need to say, oh, please tell me like where every single wood chip is coming from and that sort of thing. Really, in terms of your obligations, it's only for the material as it leaves the facility. So tons of compost sent to various places, and we're not requiring information be provided about the material is coming inbound. So, yeah, I think, does that sort of cover it? Okay. I'm going to take a few online questions here. I just wanted to follow up with the gentleman in the corner. My boss had wanted me to say that nothing in statute or regulations limit what information locals can collect. So to the extent that they want to impose additional requirements, that's not something that we can, forbid them from doing. But we want to hear about, those interactions. Let's see here. Just gonna see what's going on with the online. So we have a question from Ricky Dupar. This person asks, non-hazardous, non-RCRA and RCRA waste must also be reported. This is for all waste. So I just want to clarify that it's for non-hazardous waste. This doesn't pertain to hazardous waste landfills. So I think that was what the gentleman was asking about. All right, we have a question here from Jeff Rogers, Marketing Associate, HM Holloway. Is mine reclamation considered land application? Jeff, that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I don't think I've really dealt with that in specific detail, but there's I think there's a definition of land application somewhere. I'm not sure if it includes mine reclamation. So we can follow up offline about that, but yeah, I think it depends on several factors, like the definition of disposal, whether the permitting statuses and that sort of thing. All right, let's see what else we got. I see that we're a little bit over time, and I'm not seeing any questions right now from the online. So what we'd like to do is go ahead and take the afternoon break. It's 3:15 right now. Let's come back at 3:25, and we'll start with the getting a web pass and getting into RDRS, as well as some registration sort of best practices and how to navigate registration. Thanks for your attention. Come back in 10 minutes. Hey, thank you. Thanks for, yeah, thanks for moving around. Good, good. Well, I've got some good questions though. Yeah. Some interesting stuff. Howdy, folks. We're going to get started again with the part two, get a little bit more hands-on. So take about 30 seconds to sort of finish up, and we'll get started in just a moment here. Hi, folks. So we'll reconvene now. We got a couple of questions in during the break that I just want to read before we move on. We have another question from Ricky Dupar, Environmental Protection Specialist, Waste Management of Southern California, Azusa Land Reclamation. He asks, what if a hauler hauls covered/land application material for a landfill as a one-off, but 99% of the time the hauler hauls hazardous waste? Would they need to register? Would this material need to be reported for that one-off situation? So, Ricky, as I alluded to in the hauler section, flows from haulers that go from the generator to in-state reporting entity, you would never report in Rdrs. It's only when haulers take material out of state or to direct land application in excess of 50 tons per quarter. So taking material to a landfill to apply it as ADC or AIC, that's not what we mean when we are talking about land application. It's like direct land application for like a field or something. It's not in the context of a landfill. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify that. It's even though you would do just one, if it's just a one-off, it wouldn't be reportable in any case. And then we received an email here from Joseph Cleek. Joe Cleek is a RCRA program manager for the 29 Palms Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, a federally owned and operated facility. And he asks, does this reporting requirement apply to our facility? And he was kind enough to attach a PDF of his permit, which I took a look at during the break, and it indicated that that facility is permitted as a full solid waste facilities permit. So the answer to the question is yes, because it has a full solid waste facilities permit and it's a permitted disposal facility. You'd be required to register and report in Rdrs at any tonnage. So thank you for your question. All right, so let's move on into the creating a web pass and getting into Rdrs. So in this section, we'll cover how to create a web pass, how to log into Rdrs, and I'm going to spare you the third bullet point. We're not going to do a live demonstration. If you want to see the live demonstration, I did it yesterday at the Northern California workshop. We'll be posting the recording of that early next week, most likely. It's really, it only took about 5 minutes once I got everything set up. So, and this process that I'm about to go through should cover most of it. So let's just jump on in. To create a web pass, and actually let's do this. Please raise your hand if you already have a web pass of some kind. Okay, so maybe about a third of folks or a quarter of folks. What you'll want to do is navigate your browser to that URL that I provided in the slide. I think you could probably search on our website under WebPass at the top right, and it should pop right up for you. You'll go to create an account, which I think is already what the URL takes you to right now. It's going to come up with a screen that looks like the one on the right. That text is pretty small, so I blew up the box. You'll fill in your required information. And you'll activate your account by confirming your email address by selecting the link that is sent to you automatically. So I assume a number of you are already familiar with how to do this sort of in general. When you go to pretty much any website nowadays, you have to go through a similar rigmarole. So this is just for account security and verification purposes, is we ask you to confirm you are who you say you are on the email. And the email is going to be important because that's our main point of contact for you in terms of how you interact with this system. So you'll want to select that link and activate. It's going to take you to a screen that says, your account is now activated. From there, you will go to the Recycling and Disposal Reporting System web page, and there will be a sign-in screen, a login screen to get you into the system. You'll type in the same email that you used to create your web pass into this box in Rdrs. It's going to come back with, if you typed in the right email address, the personal assurance phrase or password protection phrase that you used when you signed up. So, for instance, I chose "I like turtles" in the one of the boxes. So when you log in into RDRS, it'll confirm for you that it is in fact a CalRecycle website by that phrase appearing. You'll enter the password that you used when you created your web pass and click Next. And that's really all there is to it. You'll get into the system and be ready to enter your pertinent information to get registered in the system. Any questions on that so far? Yes, ma'am. One moment, we'll get the microphone over.
Once I create our web pass, I won't necessarily be the one entering data. Can somebody else log in to enter data?
Yeah, they sure can, and I'm about to cover sort of that aspect of it. But the answer is yes. You can designate other people to, be the primary signature authority or a primary contact for the facility. Great question, thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, pretty straightforward stuff. And I think there are also existing demonstrations of how to do this on the CalRecycle website for other applications that we use. The purpose of the website is to basically, save you the trouble of creating a different login for each data system that you interact with. There's a waste tire hauler manifest system, systems for paint and mattresses and used oil and beverage containers. There's a number of different data systems operated by CalRecycle, and the goal is to streamline, at least the login portion by having folks just use the one web pass for all of that. So that was the goal. We're trying to continue that along for our DRS purposes. Yes, sir. One moment.
So sort of following up on her, but the idea that you're going to have multiple entities that can enter from one web pass, or would you need a web pass for each? If we have 4 solid waste facilities, a wastewater facility, a composting facility, can they all use the same web pass with perhaps different people designated for different sites?
Oh, so thank you for clarifying. We would like multiple web pass, like one web pass per person. So they would need to designate, another contact email address. That person, if they don't have a web pass, would receive a link to register.
But as I see it, that's a big problem for a complex agency with multiple people doing different parts of the reporting process. So, for example, one of our solid waste facilities may have the same person doing 4 solid waste facilities, but then have several people below them that are actually uploading the data.
So would it be impossible for the person to designate, those employees as, associated with the site, and then each of those employees has their own login and would be able to fill out the appropriate data?
Their own login for that web pass, or each one for that regulated entity? So
Each employee
two
has
landfills, 2 transfer processing facilities, all reporting on a regular basis. Some of them will have different functions that they're responsible for. So, for example, like I said, some solid waste facilities or wastewater facilities would have to report. So those are completely different departments and groups. Ironically, because we're a big agency, the signature authority is our chief engineer and general manager over all of those people. They would never touch the reporting process or enter the portal or the web pass. So all of this would be a delegated authority.
Yeah, understood. I still think that based on what you're saying, actually it is possible to, have individuals, who are affiliated with the different sites and facilities. I think we are ultimately think we're talking about the same thing. The goal is to have, the people with who are actually in charge of the reporting be able to get in and fill out what they need to do. And I think the way that we've set up, by defining these other users in the system as, associated with those respective facilities, I think that serves to the purpose of giving y'all what you wanted.
So some users would be able to access the data but not upload forms, and others would be uploading forms, but they'd all have the same authority in the web pass?
No, my understanding is that the person who initially sets up the facility will define what permissions each user would have.
Those users will change over time, so we're going back into that portal to change the list of people and emails on a regular basis?
Well, I don't want to belabor this point, but let me ask you how you would envision that working.
I was actually thinking perhaps we would create an email address for solid waste operations or an email address for wastewater operations, and within that have several email addresses that would then receive that information or be able to upload information from their particular email, but also kind of affiliated with the web pass for just one username, solid waste operations or wastewater operations.
Yeah, so I would say we'll take a look at our business rules as far as how the users are handled, and we can we can converse about the mechanics of the best way to make that happen. I just wanted to more so focus on what's required in the regulations. For these purposes, just kind of lay out the basics for everybody. So if there aren't any additional questions, I'm going to sort of move on to the next section. All right, so navigating registration. This is kind of the more theoretical, or sort of how would you, what's the best way to aggregate and to define certain activities that are happening on a site. So we'll talk about different ways to do that, and then we'll get into the data system itself and kind of take a look at some mock-ups, look at the sort of look and feel, and then tell y'all what information is required. that you need to get to have in front of you when you go to register. Okay, so multiple activities on a single site. Remember, when in doubt, please register. You can always back that out before the process has started if you have, if ultimately you want to do it a different way. You want to aggregate recyclers with transfer processors and landfills and that sort of thing. So just kind of some general rules to keep in mind. As I mentioned, a recycler can have either its own Rdrs number or report as a dependent activity of a transfer processor or disposal facility. Several recyclers, composters may aggregate and their reporting under one Rdrs number or no Rdrs numbers, and in the case of the first one, report as a dependent of the transfer processor disposal facility. And then last thing to keep in mind, disposal facility and transfer processor can never have that relationship. They always have to remain separate reporting entities on a site. So circling back around, we have the hierarchy of the site, which is the physical boundaries of the business, followed by one or more reporting entities on the site, and then potentially one or more reporting entity sub-activities reporting as a dependent of the reporting entity. So to bring it back around, we have this complex example again with the landfill, the transfer station, MRF, and the recycling center. As I mentioned, it can be on either one of these. The landfill or the transfer station report as a dependent activity of that. If there's more than one recycling or composting facility or operation, they can aggregate in essentially any way they wanted to, with one reporting under one and one reporting under the other. There could be 4 on one and 1 on the other. Additionally, it could, as I mentioned before, it could report as its own reporting entity if you so desired. It could also report take the lead and have another recycling sub-activity associated under that. It could be a standalone and have the reporting entity sub-activity go under another reporting entity. Or every single activity could be defined as its own reporting entity and reported separately. It's just how you want to organize the different things on your facility, on your site in terms of the reporting. So that kind of gives an overview of the way in which, are best practices for registering, and it's sort of, we'll leave it up to you as far as, how to, the flexibility associated with that, whether you want to report as a dependent or have everything report separately. So this is essentially what the reporting system will look like when you go to log in. It's a little bit small here, but this is basically the home page. You'll to create a new site, you'll click that plus, create organization /site, and it's going to pop open, a form fields, a web page with a bunch of form fields. It's really small, so I took the liberty of blowing up each one, and we'll just talk about some of the form fields before we close out here. So organization site name, as I think I alluded to before, it would be the name of the entire site. For instance, John's Resource Recovery Complex, to use that example. Calling code, that's like that international number. You would probably leave it as 1, unless, most 99% sure it would be just 1. Phone number, it would include area code. That's a required field pursuant to the regulations. You would check the box if it's a mobile number. Email, we're interested in the primary email address that we can use to contact that entire site. organization/site DBA name, if applicable, parent company, if applicable, and then operator company name. By that, we're interested in, for instance, if it's a permitted landfill, what is the name of the operator as listed on the solid waste facilities permit? Okay, in terms of physical and mailing address, country is the country in which the facility is located, or in the case of mailing address, receives mail. Check the tick box if it's located on tribal lands. Physical address would be the address of the physical location that the place is at. City, town, and place would be, in terms of the physical address, it would be the name of the location in which the facility is sited, and that should correspond to roughly to the solid waste jurisdiction. We have the ability to roll up some of the census designated places to the appropriate solid waste jurisdiction. For instance, if you selected East Pasadena, the system would know that what you're talking about is LA unincorporated. So we would have that functionality and that will become necessary for host assignment of waste. Mailing address, we want you to use the USPS conventions. State, pretty much is going to be California. Postal code would be the 5-digit zip, and both of those are required fields, as well as the city, town, place. And then we want you to define your organization/site primary contact. This is the individual who created the registration. So whomever created the registration would be that site's primary contact, at least at the inception. So that's the grayed out boxes are the ones that are brought in from the web pass. Those are required fields, and then you would be required to enter a phone number, 10-digit phone number with any extensions. And that's a way for us to get in touch with you at the organization site level for any questions we might have about the facility or any of the facilities on that site. Okay, now it's time to add all the reporting entities on your site. So you would scroll down a bit, and right below the mailing address, physical address part is the reporting entity activity add feature. So you would click that plus. It would pop up this pop-up here and has several fields. Reporting entity activity, you'll want to select that from the drop-down. We mentioned, several. I think we've pretty much, talked about almost all of these by now. So if you would want to look to the regulations and determine what kind of reporting entity you'd want to register, you'd type in the reporting entity activity name. So the name of the reporting entity, for instance, Agua Mansa MRF. Reporting entity activity DBA name, if applicable. EPA ID or Swiss, if applicable. Then defining a signature authority, you can check the tick box and it will import the information from primary contact if you so desire. Otherwise, you can define another signature authority, first name, last name, email, calling code, and phone number are the required fields for that. Oh, I just want to touch on this here. One more thing about the reporting entity activity add screen. If you are creating reporting entity sub-activities, you would not do it on this screen. This is only for entering lead reporting entities. It's actually, once you put in all your leads, you would go back in and define the reporting entity sub-activities. But and we can clarify that in terms of the best practices for registration. But I just wanted to sort of touch on that because there's a potential for confusion. Okay, so after defining the signature authority, we would hit save, and that's it. You've created your potentially complex site, and that's pretty much all that's required until you go to report, which would be October, November, or December. That brings us to just about the end of our program. I'd like to now take a moment to ask if there are any sort of final questions, comments, follow-up. If anybody has any epiphanies or flashes of the obvious. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Riverside County Waste. We have several landfills, and am I to understand that, well, right now, we report all waste coming in by jurisdiction, and it's, total of direct haul, self-haul, transfer stations. With this new reporting, are we not including the total tonnage disposed from transfer stations?
Great question, and I think this gets a little bit ahead into the actual reporting part, but I'll sort of preview that. So what will happen is you have the opportunity to add in that information yourself manually if you want to, but we wanted to make it easy for folks. So the material that transfer processors reported sending you will now show up on your screen, and you would either accept or modify those tonnages. And along with those tonnages, they would have the jurisdiction of origin and source sector information already entered. So hopefully, the goal is to sort of make it a little bit easier in that way. So it'll be automatically brought in, but you don't necessarily have to agree with those values.
Okay, so when we log in, we would see what
transfer processors reported sending you.
Reported by jurisdiction, and we say yes or no.
That's correct.
Cool.
Great question, thank you. I'm going to take a couple more online here. We have one from Terry Lewis, Dispatch American Refuse. I currently have a username and password for CalRecycle for tires. Is that good enough? Terry, if you're referring to a WebPass for the tire manifest system, if that uses WebPass, then that would transfer over to Rdrs. Yes, we've got the web address up for folks if you want to send in any last-minute questions or comments. Let's see, we have another one coming in from Joseph Cleek over at 29 Palms. Can you please provide a copy of today's workshop? Yes, Joe, it'll be up on the RDRS reporting, and you can watch this immediately afterwards on YouTube. It's going to be archived, and it'll have the entire thing, same URL. All right, a couple more here. One from Christine Williamson, Waste Management Specialist, Kern County Public Works. She asks, we have diversion at areas at all our landfills, including these areas include accepting and sorting recoverable materials, metals, organics, tires, etc., that are shipped off-site for recycling or disposal at one of our other landfills. Would these activities qualify as transfer processor activities or simply sub-activities of the landfill? A certain amount of residuals are usually generated by these activities. If it does qualify a transfer processor, then that means that they must be registered under different RDRS numbers. Great question, Christine. I think there's a couple things to unpack with that. So in particular, when it comes to transfer processor, what we would want to know is if it were already a permitted transfer processing facility or operation. If that is the case, then they would not be able to combine the reporting with the landfill and would need to be reported separately. However, if it's just like a collection point and it's not regulated as anything, there might be other considerations like, defining that as a reporting entity sub-activity and reporting that information alongside with the landfill. It seems like kind of like a little, we're getting into some complex territory, so I don't want to sort of expound on that a whole lot more, but of course, happy to follow up with you in helping you make that determination. And I think I need a little bit more information about what all is specifically going on before I can say with certainty you're in or you're out, or you should report this way or that way. Let's see. Any other questions from the room? Yes, sir. Oh, one second. We're just going to cruise on over with the mic.
Under the who's out, section 18815-3-C-3, a recycler who only recycles material that they have generated, is that synonymous with a composter who only composts material that they have generated?
So they don't receive material from generators? They
Correct.
just compost their own material?
Correct.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm glad you brought that up. That sounds like that. I mean, my understanding is that. Well, let me ask: is it a permitted compostable material handling facility, or?
So we're a large horse stable that we do our own composting. We don't take any material in.
You're not
So-
permitted.
So we're actually we're notified we're not permitted, I guess would be the
Okay.
designation.
I think my understanding is, based on like a plain reading of that, you don't take in material from elsewhere. So that exclusion, it would make sense that exemption would apply to you.
Okay, thank you.
But we could follow up with that. Let's chat afterwards and we'll exchange info. Great, thank you for that. Any other folks want to make a last minute anything? Yes, ma'am, you'll be the last person.
My name's Kristen Davis, Enviromine. We're a consultant. I'm trying to wrap my head around the registration of the web pass. Just say one person signs up for a web pass, registers the entity. Then you can give access. This is kind of based on what he was saying as well. And then in that system, you can give access to other people to be able to upload reports later on.
Yes, that's my understanding of how we're going to construct it.
Okay.
All right, thank you all so much for your attention today. You've been terrific. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day.